being recorded. And maybe nobody's watching now, but watching later.
Is it forever?
I'd like to see how many views are on those.
A year, it's more than you think.
Yeah, I know. But does it record the repeat people? Or is it just a one-time view?
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm just curious.
I don't know. I wonder if some people just like get in there and they fast forward to the thing they're thinking about and then.
Mm-hmm.
We are live.
All right. We still have 5 minutes before we're supposed to start. Can we start early? We're all here.
I don't know, everybody's here.
I suppose, I mean, there could be someone from the public that walks in, that's true, it's possible. I'm not expecting anybody in particular, but.
So are we on action right now? Can you pause it
Yeah.
until 6 o'clock?
I sure can.
Okay.
Are you sure?
It says pause.
Hey, how was your fishing trip?
We did good. Yeah, the one, was that like Ozark? Was that weekend?
I don't know, the one where you had to put off, no, I thought you were going to Canada.
No, I'm doing that in July.
Oh,
20th.
okay.
But that weekend I went to Lake Ozark. We did good, about winter down on crappie both days, so.
Nice.
Yeah.
You do. I had a buddy who fishes bass tournaments down there on a regular basis, and he said that this year's been one of the best years.
Really?
Yeah, he said they've been jerking a lot of weight,
Good. That's awesome. I'm glad to hear.
bigger fish on average, all that.
It's good.
Is it because it's cold?
I don't know. Hard telling.
Well, yeah, it's.
Do you think they eat more when it's cold? So they eat fatter.
So this is 6.
So, quick question, can committees make motions, Rick?
Well, I guess in theory, you're following Robert's Rules of Order, so you should still be doing a motion, I think,
If
to make any
needed.
decisions or recommendations. But this will be more of a working committee, obviously, because you're looking to put together, mainly put together your plan. So that's what it would be. Not just one meeting, I suspect.
So is a recommendation more along the lines?
Well, I would think that, I would think that any plan that the subcommittee creates is gonna go to the.
Well, we'll do roll call first. Marshall Dan McKinnon.
Here.
James David Williams.
Present.
Sergeant Wenley.
Here.
Okay. Mayor Frickin Brendan. All right, and we do have one public comment from Crystal McCune.
Can I respectfully request if I can maybe comment at the end of the meeting, because you might answer some of my questions as we go through it, if that's
Fine.
okay with permission from the chair?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving past that into a scope of problem, looking at the agenda we have prepared here, obviously the purpose of this is to come up with a comprehensive strategy to minimize the number of car versus deer strikes in the city of Wildwood. It's my understanding that a portion of this work has already been put together based upon expertise that the Missouri Department of Conservation has in this. As the curators and basically not the owners, but the people who look after all the wildlife. The wildlife in the state of Missouri belongs to all of us as managed, controlled, administered by the Department of Conservation. So obviously we look to them for guidance on how we administer things like this. It looks like we have an existing report that only had just a couple of minutes to look at here, talking about 2018 data in terms of the number of strikes. Has anyone else looked at this and has anything that they want to kick around or discuss?
can speak somewhat on kind of the history. We've recognized for quite some time that deer vehicle collisions are a concern in the city, and that we also have a large population of deer. So given that, in March of 2018, the police department conducted a distance sampling survey in a 5.5 square mile area in the northeast portion of the city. And the results of that survey, you have the complete study there, basically reveals that the deer population is between 4 and 5 times what the recommended population level should be by the Missouri Department of Conservation. So, I mean, that kind of, I think, drives the whole issue that we need probably to address the situation in some fashion to try and reduce the number of vehicle crashes that are occurring involving deer. And then, you know, just all the other related problems that occur as far as property damage to vegetation at homes and things like that. So basically, on average, since 2014, we estimate yearly there are approximately 233 deer struck in the city of Wildwood. So we come about that figure by compiling a few different data points or sets. So each year, on average, the police department euthanizes 45 deer. So these are animals that were called out to either we respond to a crash that occurred and the animal's still alive, and we euthanize it on the scene, or we receive a radio call from a resident that there's an injured deer somewhere in the city, and we respond and euthanize the animal. Then we have, we use our CAD data to determine the unreported instances of animals that have been struck by vehicles, and on a yearly basis, that averages out to be 180. And then we have the instances where people stay on scene and actually report the crash to the police, and on average, that's around 52.
When you say CAD, are you talking about like it's?
So it's a computer-aided dispatch record information, so it's basically our call records for calls for service. And then, on average, there's around 4 crashes that result in injuries to either an occupant or driver of the vehicles that are involved in the deer crashes. So it just seems that based on our data that we collect, that generally the number of deer crashes tend to have a peak between October and November every year. So that kind of corresponds with their rut season.
Right. Question, although it may not be included here, I've only had a chance to skim through it. Do you have a feel for the time of day? Are most of these evening events, or is
Yeah, I mean,
it scattered? Or?
We don't really break it down by time of day, but I would say that predominantly deer crashes occur in the evening and overnight hours. And generally, they're not moving around too much during the daytime, unless they're being chased by a buck.
I mean, especially in November, rush hour traffic is when their activity is pretty high. So that would also contribute to the amount of deer strikes.
Okay. Do you have a feel, or really just for anyone on the panel, does anyone have a feel for what what's been done in the past in terms of like education, awareness type of activities, in terms of what's been done, what's worked, what hasn't worked? Do we have a feel for them?
In Wildwood?
We just really just kind of baby steps so far.
In Wildwood, not much.
I think Rick can answer this question better than anyone.
And I don't have my history with the city goes back, well, I mean, I've been a resident for 20 years, but as an employee of the city, it only goes 4 years, so I don't know Officer Wendling if he's got any feedback on that, but I don't recall too much.
Yeah, I mean, we really haven't been able to take steps to effectively reduce the number of crashes. We haven't had any campaigns per se, public information. I know the Department of Conservation publicizes educational materials and things like that, but we haven't, to my knowledge, we haven't had any kind of a directed information campaign in Wildwood.
It's certainly been a topic that has been in front of the Board of Public Safety, almost annually.
Right.
Or at least since I've been involved with the city, so I suspect it's been very much a reoccurring issue that it really hasn't been addressed, but there surely has been an awful lot of discussion about it.
Another question that comes to mind, given that, deer are herd animals, do we have a sense for what our neighbors are doing that might be affecting what happens in our part of the neck of the woods?
Well, I mean, as far as affecting the population in certain areas,
Or just in terms of their mitigation or control activities, maybe pushing them from their neighborhood to ours?
I don't think necessarily, other than, making the mistake of feeding them. That's a concern, not only because of, you're drawing them into the neighborhoods, into well-traveled roadways, but you're also hurting the deer population itself. And the reason and the education behind that is that if you have deer that are eating from the same pile of corn or eating from the same food pile, if one of them's diseased and they leave their saliva on there, the other deer are getting that, and you talk about a painful death right there. So just for the general concern of the animal, the Department of Conservation does not want you to feed them. Everyone likes to look at them, but they don't consider these things, I don't think, because I don't think they're educated on it. So I think that needs to be a component of the education. It's like, hey, look, this is not just to reduce the amount of deer strikes.
Right.
It's also for the health of the herd. If the food isn't in the neighborhoods anymore, once the landscaping is taken care of and ate by the deer, they're going to be forced into the more wooded areas just to forage for food, which is what we want. We want to get them out of the neighborhoods. They're still going to be there, but just feeding them from your back porch causes a huge problem and should not be done.
Because people decide they don't want to do that in February when it's single
There you go.
digits.
There you go. And not only that, corn really isn't the healthiest thing for a deer, believe it or not. In the wintertime it provides carbohydrates and that helps them stay warm, but as far as nutritional value, foraging for their own food and maybe going into the farmlands where there's soybeans and other different types of food for them to eat is a better option, just for the health of the deer.
Yeah.
Because if you look, especially in what I've noticed around here in other areas, like, you could say town and country, Kirkwood has a deer population problem, believe it or not. The deer aren't as big as what they should be either. You look at the births, whitetails are usually born in June. From what I've seen of the babies, they're smaller than what they should be right now because they just don't have the food to support the population that they are.
Right.
So for overall deer herd, us coming up with a plan and educating the public is important too.
Other input, observations, things that come to mind about, the problem is, as we have it here, I know that we're very rural in wards 1 and portions of, I think, Ward 8. So.
So I don't know if you had an opportunity to read Erin Shank's evaluation. She pretty much hits everything on the head as far as I'm concerned about what effective management options there are. So I mean, basically, the only effective means to control the population is through hunting or culling.
Right.
Other measures or programs are just found to be ineffective or too stressful on the animals themselves. So based on her recommendations, she's basically promoting hunting to encourage the landowners to hunt, and then to explore the bait and sharpshoot program to manage the problem, and to communicate with the parks department, state parks, county parks, to more effectively manage the deer populations in those areas within the city. And then a component is education of the public to encourage the use of deer damage techniques, including fencing, repellents, and scare tactics, things.
That was item 5 on the agenda, really, was to kind of go through
Go over that.
and read as kind of a thought. Aaron Shank has been in front of the board several times over the past, so certainly she would be, we talked about having her available to meet with the subcommittee. And
Do we have a sense of what the council would be in favor of in terms of the different kind of management options you articulated? I know that we have existing, if you're on the right side of 109 and F3+, you can hunt, in conjunction with the Department of Conservation guidelines. And I'm sure there's people who do that, but there's probably people who have that enough acreage and enough type of terrain where there are deer who wouldn't even consider to, maybe they don't hunt themselves, but they don't know that, hey, if they let other people onto their land, it would help everybody. So I'd just be curious.
You're
what's
asking if the council, you got one right there.
Any field councilperson?
There's just a couple of feedback from residents in different wards, and I had some conversations since yesterday with a few, and I thought Tim was gonna show up. Like you said, it's come up in front of council a lot, and I think it comes down to what the money management is. I think that that's what's really scared the committee to come up to council, because if you see Town and Country's report, it costs them about $88,000 a year just to maintain where they're at, and God knows what they've spent before. So I think that it comes down to taxpayer money and what the management cost would be in order to manage. You're not gonna fix the problem, it's just more of a management standpoint. But the concerns is the education. You have people that love the deer. But I'm also hearing a lot of people that if you do allow people, let's say up on Clayton Road and we do less restriction, if they have 3 acres, they can hunt archery. You hit it with the arrow, it runs however far and falls on somebody's property. Who's coming to pick that up? So people are more concerned that they're not going to be able to retrieve the deer as they start allowing hunting, and does that exacerbate the issue if they run across Clayton Road and all of a sudden he's hit with an arrow and he runs in front of a car.
Sure.
So I think that when you look at more the dense population and where we really need it the most based on what we're seeing from the traffic studies and what I saw what Town and Country focused on, I think we're gonna run into a bit of a problem in these areas, because you're right, out 109, you have 20 acres, it's not a big concern, but you're looking at Clayton, Strucker, Wild Horse Creek, where there's a lot of homes and a lot of traffic and the speed's high. How do you navigate that?
The thought that comes to mind, and again, I don't want to invent the wheel if someone else has already done the math and figured it out. If you have a combination of, different techniques in different areas, so that maybe you do something in like the Clayton Road area to kind of push them into the areas where they're more easily hunted or more safely hunted, and you can maybe kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I don't know if that's an option or not, or.
And I just, from my personal standpoint and reading the reports and watching Town and Country in the newspapers for the last 10 years, as I'm trying to manage what they have, they are very different to an extent of what we have here. We're 64 square miles, they're not.
Yeah.
There's more, population that's more close together there than here. But we do have it on the inner circle of Town Center and the adjoining properties. Is that looking at letting just deer hunters hunt, like I know that Dan is a good deer hunter, and I know he's a trained hunter.
Right.
But if we start opening this up to just random people to go out there and shoot deer, I think that the council is going to look at that just as much as, okay, that's a dangerous weapon.
Right.
How do we manage that? I think that the city and the residents would be more comfortable. You hire a professional that says that we know what we're doing, we're managing it, we're going to give reports. We're not just going to let landowners go out in these 3-acre lots that are off Clayton Road and shoot deer. I think that that needs to be more of a peace of mind for residents. I think that's what we're hearing.
Do we have ballpark in terms of like what that costs? Is that like
I think it's
a per
per
pelt?
And that's where I would use the resources. Like they released this great report and study, and I've read through it. I don't know how they've based it up, but they said like the white buffalo for calling was 62,000. And then they broke it down to 5,000 for the distance sampling, which I think the county provided that for us, so that's not a cost that's in there. Then 15,000, this is where you're gonna run into the money, is the food processing for the St. Louis Area Food Bank. So if they harvest 62 deer and it's $15,000, Dan, I think that you had that conversation on how much they would cost to harvest the deer for the city, and then there's $822 for bait and supplies.
It's like just over 200 per animal.
And does that sound normal? And they were gonna charge the city for it, so it's how many deer do you harvest?
Yeah, I mean, it for deer processing you're talking about?
Yeah, that's what,
cost of?
the food
They're
processing
talking-
for St. Louis Area Food Bank, so it's feed the harvest.
It'd be, you know, I mean, I get a discount where I go, but yeah, I mean, it's $100 to $200 per deer.
I do mine myself.
Depending on the weight. I mean, some go by the weight and some
Right.
go by just a deer. So it just all depends on the place that you use. You know, I mean, we could explore maybe partnering with some meat processors that may
Right.
say they want to be part of this program.
And I suspect for health and cleanliness issues, it has to be something where it's a formal handoff in terms of getting into a processor who can
Absolutely.
do it, and they have, you know, sanitation guidelines.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're inspected and you know, the Share the Harvest program's been around for many, many years that I've taken full advantage of over the
Right.
years. With,
Yeah.
you know.
And I just think conservation's gonna have to allow tags and really track this, and the city's gonna have to work with them to see how many tags we can actually issue out based on landowners, or the city just gets it for whatever contract comes in. So if you let landowners do it, they're limited to what they can and can't do depending on.
So a landowner doing it by
Around
themselves
here.
would
Yeah, you can
be,
get as many tags as
It's
you
all
want.
established by.
Right.
Around here,
Conservation
Right.
you can harvest as many as you want, except for the bucks.
right.
You can harvest as many antlerless deer as you want, which is what Aaron recommends anyway.
Yeah.
They're the ones that make the babies. And so, it's the does that outpopulate the bucks, so. But that's pretty well unlimited.
Okay. So yeah, that's kind of where it goes to, Dave, is that how many deer you want to harvest and what cost does that look like?
Right.
I think that's them minimizing over 10 years. I think the report that they took out, 361 deer,
Mhm.
and it cost $15,000. So it's not too many, but if you look, their percent was 19% decrease compared to the previous year. This is 2018's report for vehicle crashes. So there's 62 collisions.
Right.
So they had a 19% decrease, which I think is huge for the populated areas. So they had a focus group, and they had a task force with resident input that focused on those maps and brought those ward people in together
Right.
to kind of do the educational piece.
But to your earlier point, I think we probably need to address it from both ends in terms of like just the economics and math of the situation, as well as like the residents' concerns, and because we have to move both of those to like the same, you know, think of like a Venn diagram. You have to move them into that same circle to say, yes, this is the right decision, and this is how we're going to do it. We're okay with the cost, and we're comfortable with the methodologies that
Sure.
we're going to use.
And the public safety, I mean, just saying it's a safety issue, and I guess I would turn to the sergeant to ask, is how many of those deer crashes are fatal, or are they like really serious accidents?
I'm not aware of any fatal ones, but as far as the extent of injuries, I don't know. They're just listed as an accident that resulted in an injury. So, I mean, the crash report doesn't state, you know, in depth what the injuries specifically are.
But yeah, so if you had that knowledge of what's injury and not injury, and if you look at, there's a difference there, council might look at that and go, oh man, people are really starting to get hurt, not just property damage.
Sure.
So it heightens up more of a public safety. That's another avenue I would try to push.
Right. But then also just, yeah, I like what, the other thing you said is just, this is what Town and Country spent, if it was 80,000 and change, just to maintain where they're at and keep it from getting worse.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's that component certainly that's gonna be part of it. It's like if we do nothing, it's just gonna exponentially grow. So there's gonna be some cost, some unavoidable, yes, this is something, we have to do something. And what it's gonna cost, and it might involve, you know, a dead deer in someone's yard by whatever means,
Mhm.
you know, brought about that animal's demise, but there's gonna have to be something done, or else it's just gonna be that.
Absolutely.
There's clearly a cost right now associated with the overpopulation,
Mhm.
whether it's deer car crashes, certainly 200+ crashes a year is a significant expense to residents, and that's not accounting the damage deer caused throughout the city. And those are costs that could be quantified by the committee, I suspect. For comparison to the cost to try to address the problem, I suspect 80,000 a year would be much less than potentially the damage that's being
So
done.
too, if you're talking about 200 insurance claims and 200 deductibles that need to be paid, and medical bills associated with the injuries and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, just a small amount of damage on a vehicle now is gonna equate to probably at least $1,000.
Right.
So,
Very quick.
I mean, you can do
Might
that
just be your deductible.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
So,
pretty easy to figure out.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sergeant, could those deer crash reports, I mean, you could go through each one of those individually to get more detail with regard to potential injuries or not?
The injury classifications are probable, probable not apparent,
Apparent,
apparent.
serious.
Yeah, I'm not sure I know one's fatal, but, I mean, they're not really that descriptive. But I can do that if you feel it would be a benefit.
Well, I wanted to mention that if you guys want us to do that, we could probably do.
I think there would be
Well-
some benefit to that.
I think what the sergeant was trying to say too is that the injuries are not in the accident report. It's just, like he said, there's something, it's just a very small, vague thing you
Just
put
a-
in there about the injuries. It's more about the damage to the car
Right.
and what occurred, rather than, hey, it resulted in this, and this is the extent of their injuries. There's no doctor reports that go along with it or anything like that.
But can I interject? So if it's a J2, if it's with injuries, I mean, I think that's pretty the extent that maybe the city just needs.
Well,
There's an
yeah,
injury.
I already have that.
Yeah.
On average, it's 4 per year.
I think that's what counts. I wouldn't want to know if there's a leg, a head, and a body.
I mean, you're not really gonna, I don't think you're gonna gain anything from knowing the exact classification of the injury. I mean, it's either, you know, disabling or not disabling is basically how they're categorized. So, or apparent or not apparent to the officer, just the person saying that they're injured,
Mhm.
but there's no way for you to see that they're injured, or you can
Right.
see that they're injured.
But
That's
in
basically
CAD
what the categories.
Yes,
Right.
so if it comes out as an accident with injuries and you guys get on it, does the CAD or the dispatcher reclassify it to a non-injury report in the system? So you guys
Yeah.
can run it from CAD?
The final disposition will be the correct classification for the crash.
So you can run those reports easy. I would hate for you to sit here and run.
Well,
it.
we have a spreadsheet that we maintain to do our annual crash analysis that has.
Okay. I'm trying to make it easy on you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, to that point, if we could get it quickly and just with like a very rough approximation, say if it was, you know, an incident that had, you know, minor damage to the vehicle, just come up with like a ballpark and maybe say it's $1,000 because that's what their deductible was.
I wouldn't go
Or
to
making
that
it
extent. I don't
difficult.
think council would be interested. It's more of a percent, like 80% of car crashes that involve deer have injuries.
Well,
And then I think you can put the damage amount to it.
I think the more, the bigger picture to look at here would be the property damage over the injuries at this point. Obviously, injuries can occur from any crash with a deer. I mean, you've heard of people dying from it.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you're talking about a financial standpoint, you know, like Rick said, the property damage way outweighs the cost of trying to cull the herd. So, you know, it's just my 2 cents on it.
I think we could probably just, you know, gather the stats and then let
Mhm.
people maybe make their own judgment about
Mhm.
Absolutely.
what it's gonna be. It's
Yeah,
like-
put that out to the public. I guarantee you that there's gonna be some people that are shocked by those numbers. So I think that would be a good thing to add to the education
Yeah.
part of it.
They can come up with their own
Exactly,
multiplier,
right, yeah.
as well as us trying to
Exactly.
put something on it. Okay.
So basically, if we're talking about item 3, you don't feel like we need to do any additional analysis there or any additional work to kind of come up with a better handle on the problem? Are you satisfied with the information you have right now?
I think I need a little bit more time to kind of like read through this and read through what Sergeant Winwood has as well, and just to kind of come up with, you know, something that you can look at in 5 minutes. You know, if I was giving it to council member or some other committee person saying, hey, in 5 minutes, I wanted to tell you what took me 2 hours to put together. So you can know this is the problem, this is where we want to go, and this is how we're going to get there.
So we can keep it on the agenda, basically, then, for the next
think
meeting
so.
after we look at everything? Okay.
Next item on the list, if I'm going through these in the correct order, was a review of existing hunting ordinances, which I'm already somewhat familiar with, but did have a chance to look at as well. Is there anything in here that's a showstopper that we need to highlight, other than the fact that people can, subject to having 3 acres, and the other guidelines about like 450 feet from a road or X number of feet from a dwelling, other kinds of items that we need to bring out and just kind of like, because I kind of see this as almost being like, almost like a half sheet. If I was putting together a PowerPoint presentation, we would say, hey, existing hunting ordinances, these are things that landowners can do to help control the population. And again, obviously, we don't have to go through this in all of this kind of detail, but we could very quickly pick out 4 or 5 bullet points just to make people aware of the fact. And I think in that is also that if you're a landowner, there's no reason you can't have guests or friends or relatives over to hunt on your land. I know that there's a page on here that articulates this, the form you fill out, you put it on your dashboard. So, any other thoughts or ideas, brainstorm kind of comments about hunting regulations?
Well, I think again, you know, that's something that's the public education, you know, definitely something we want to highlight. Someone who's a non-hunter isn't going to be familiar with those at all.
Right.
So even though those are on the website, it's something they're not inclined to look at. So if we put it in our separate effort to educate the public, I think that would be a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
I would agree 100%. I think most people that aren't hunters, even those that are, probably aren't very familiar with our ordinances. Would you agree?
Yeah.
And even council members, frankly, probably don't know the ordinances relative to hunting.
Right.
So there's a lot of people there that need to get educated to the,
Mhm.
and they may not all agree with what even on the books right now, but that effort I think is very important, and that's, we kind of fall into the community education potentially, that awareness that we already are allowing hunting to a large degree on 3 or larger lots.
And I guess perhaps the Department of Conservation would be the one better take this question. If we wanted to know in terms of like how many animals are harvested within the city of Wildwood in a given year over year. Is that part of what we already have?
They probably don't have that data, but, I mean, I can tell you, in St. Louis County, the data they have online is just by county.
Right.
I don't think they keep statistics by city.
No, they don't. When you call in a deer, when you
Yeah,
check it in
by
online,
county.
they just ask what county
Yeah.
that you harvested in it, and, you know, by what method, and if it was a buck or a doe or a button buck or whatever.
Dan, one thing I know that's been talked about in the past, I'm not saying it's something we want to do, but the idea of pooling properties. For
Yes.
the city of Chesterfield and Ladue both allow that. Ladue actually, that we only have to have a minimum of 2 acres. Chesterfield it's 1, but they allow the pooling of properties with adjacent landowners and.
Right, that did come up, and that would be something too that you know, would definitely be, especially areas east of 109. I feel like it would be a viable option. It's something that hasn't been done yet. So if you're talking about trying to reduce the population in these areas, that would be an option. And also, and you can speak to this also, Aaron had also recommended too that we get with subdivision trustees
Okay.
about common grounds. Because you have some that have a 3 acre patch here or a 5 acre patch here, stuff like that. And I know from my neighborhood, it's heavily populated in those small woodlots, which would be ideal for an archery hunt. Now again, you know, part of educating the public is, hey, look, you know, with these efforts that we're making, there's going to be an effort from archery hunters to reduce this population. If a deer happens to expire on your property, call the St. Louis County Police, let them know about it, and then they can come out and either deal with it or maybe try to locate that hunter who is probably looking for that animal to come and get it. And I think it might reduce that shock factor, you know, maybe of seeing an injured deer expire on your property, which nobody wants to see, but it's just reality. You know, I mean, you're just gonna have to just suck it up.
It's gonna be on the side of the road.
Exactly, which you would rather have one die in your yard and have it harvested and have that meat go to someone who is gonna consume it, rather than hit that animal with your car, bruise it to the point where hardly any part of that meat can be used. That, you know, that's the trade-off, you know?
Rick, can extra funds be made available, certain areas of town or all of town for deer pickup in these situations? Do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suppose that certainly would be a possibility, certainly not something we've considered to my knowledge in the past.
Are you talking about a scenario where a deer who was taken by archery, you know, wasn't found by the hunter, but
Found
some
by somebody
homeowner?
else? Yeah, this happens all the time with deer strikes.
Right.
They end up in people's yards and then they call us, and
Right.
if it's within, you know, a number of feet of the right of way on a public street, as our right of way maintenance program, we
Right.
will pick it up. Or sometimes we can argue there's a health and sanitation issue in certain areas. It just depends. There's other areas where you can't really argue for us to pick it up. But, you know, in an HOA where they're permitting a hunt and they're trying to improve the situation, I'm just wondering if.
Thought comes to mind that
Yeah.
if we have the page on here that talks about, hey, I'm a landowner east of 109, I've got X number of acres, and someone is gonna put this on their, you know, dashboard to say, I'm here on Dan's land to hunt from this day to this day. Could something, and I'm not trying to kill the paper, but if a similar protocol could be put in place where a person is gonna do a residential archery hunt, so that we would know who that person was, who was hunting on certain days. That way, if an animal was found, it's like, I thought he ran this way, and I ran this way, and
I see where you're going with that, and that wouldn't be a bad idea. I think something as easily as calling one of the city offices and say, hey, I'm gonna be in this area archery hunting, I have permission on this land. Then if the police department gets a call
right.
a
Just to
block
connect the
over,
dots.
just connect the dots,
Yeah.
and then you can call Joe Smith and say, hey, you know, your deer was located over here, come and get it.
Right.
Yeah.
We could try that.
That's actually exactly what, I should have printed off copies for everybody of Ladou's policy.
Oh.
They have to submit where they're hunting, they have to have a yellow card on their dashboard. Copy of their tag's gotta be submitted actually to the police department. I'd encourage everybody, if you got time, to actually look at that, I should have printed off
And that's the
copies.
city of Ladue?
Yep.
Okay.
I've had discussions with at least one property about that very thing, that there ought to be more notice given to adjacent property owners if someone's hunting. So,
Yeah.
now that's just within our existing regs, you know, that's the sentiment, that, you know, if you have an adjacent property to let people hunt on it, you ought to be informed of it.
I agree.
Totally agree.
Maybe specific times, like specific blocks in the morning and specific blocks at twilight as well.
With the weather and conditions, and how do you get notice to the adjoining neighbors if you just say that between this month and this month, they're gonna be hunting and you don't know what day?
No, that's not
I
what I,
think
Just how do you get
on
to
a
know
daily
these
basis.
neighbors?
On a daily basis.
But how do the neighbors know if you're giving notice?
If it's in a HOA, that, you know,
even in
It
an
might be tough
HOA
to actually
environment,
give-
it's probably gonna be hit or miss at best. I'm gonna I'm on our board, there's 3 of us, we have 283 houses, but your neighborhood's more than double our size.
And we have the acreage to hunt,
Right,
but I have too many homes
yeah.
to
I mean,
send a
you're-
notice to. Do you know what I mean? I would rather say, okay, between this period and this period, yes, we might have these hunters out there.
Mhm.
Just if you find a deer, please give our HOA person a call and they'll call you guys. You know, just to alleviate some of the pressure on the city that we have a,
Is there notice given? to
I
the
was,
police?
my frame
Site
of mind was
manager.
more in the 3-acre lots that are not necessarily on that side, but that would also be a good idea there too. It's like,
I just don't know when
If
you're
it's
gonna be
put
there,
something
but
out.
it's,
right,
you know, January, February, there's gonna be hunters.
if
guys
you
see
have
a
an animal
deer-
expire on your yard, call this number.
Yes.
Okay.
For big areas like
Yeah.
what we're talking about. But I agree, if you're going way out in the rural area, then I can see where you can do those runoffs.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's honestly pretty infrequent that an animal ends up way off the beaten path to where, you know,
Right.
if there's one in somebody's yard, the officer will drag it out to the curb, and then the city will come and pick it up. I mean, if the animal's 200 yards into the woods, you're just gonna let it lay there probably, because nobody's gonna come and retrieve it. And it'll just naturally decompose, or other animals will consume it.
And if it's 200 yards into the woods, more than likely it's gonna be over here, there's, you know, so, yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, you could probably speak to the infrequency of that happening, right? I mean,
It's
you
not
guys don't
real
get a lot of
common.
those calls, it's not real
No.
common.
I mean, most common that if the animal's, you know, probably within 50 feet of the roadway, honestly, when they get struck, if they're that badly injured, or, you know, the exception is if somebody's hunting and it's not a fatal wound and, you know, they're able to walk off. Sometimes they don't die, and sometimes they do, but in those instances, usually I think they go to an area where nobody even knows that they're there.
I would agree, and they go to thick brush.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and, so it's a rare situation really to have one, from a hunter that dies in somebody's yard, actually.
Right, but I know that is a concern from residents, is that I think that's just a worst-case scenario type of concern.
If we open it up
Not
to-
because it's happened too much before now. I did read an email, one was from Ms. Bedvig, that she has had that happen, where there was a deer that expired that had an arrow in it and stuff like that. But I think that's more of an exception as opposed to the rule.
I have an instance,
But the complaint was is her property's so far off Clayton that it's not in the right of way, so they were left with the disposal of it. And they felt that that was unfair because they could see it, they could smell it, and that had an arrow in it.
For situations like that where, like in that scenario where a hunter isn't either A, unable to find the animal, B, changes his or her mind, or it's too cold or whatever, and they just give up, and then you go outside and you have an animal in your yard, that by default falls upon the city to remedy that. Would there be any hurdles or other obstacles if there was, you know, an adjoining landowner who said, hey, this looks like, hey, Gene, we have this program where people can hunt, and they probably either got lost or they gave up or something else happened. You know, I hunt, I could take the animal. Is that something that, I'm just thinking outside the box.
Well, I think a simple phone call to one of the city offices, however we would want to set it up, saying, hey, I'm going to be in the Lake Chesterfield Common Ground archery hunting.
Right.
I'm driving a silver F-150 truck, you're gonna see it parked on this street. And then the police department gets a call, hey, I have a dead deer in my yard with an arrow up in it. You just connect the dots. Hey, Dan, go pick up your deer, here it
Right.
is.
If that's not too much of a burden on the officers here to connect those dots, I think that's probably the best option.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to have somebody manning a phone line during the entire deer season, and, I mean, you'd have to have probably a person dedicated to manage all of that. Well, you can't expect a beat officer to.
Correct.
To take care of all those phone calls.
Mhm.
So, I mean, I don't know exactly what kind of process you have in mind, but I don't think it's
Right.
something that would work very
you
easily.
want to connect the hunter to the deer,
Yeah.
basically, right? So they.
But the police are
Maybe I'm not
doing-
thinking of
Yeah.
something then, but I just feel like, you may have maybe 10 guys on any given day
Yeah.
saying, hey, you need to call during business hours. And whether that be the operator here, whether that be the front desk officer says, all right, Dan McCune, Lake Chesterfield, gonna be parking on Waterfront Way. And that list is there.
Yep.
And then at 8 o'clock that night, someone on Cove Landing calls and says, hey, I have a dead deer with an arrow in it in my yard, and go, oh, that was McCune's deer.
Yeah.
A simple phone call and you're done.
We don't have
Well,
a
I think-
desk officer on weekends.
The
It's
HOA
Monday
can,
through Friday.
I mean, there's somebody that works in that office. I mean,
Only
they
in
can-
Lake Chesterfield, we're the only self-managed in this area.
Right.
They have, outside people that don't work on the weekends.
Correct.
um,
But I think the police are gonna run into a problem because they're gonna see people hunting and they're gonna get called that people are hunting.
Right.
So they're gonna be running around
How
trying to
about
figure out
if-
who you
And
are.
that's
if you wanted it
easy
the
answer to that.
reverse way, if the occurrence happens, then it's a requirement for the hunter to make notification to the city.
A thought occurs because a lot of this is like, I have a problem, and then you have a problem, and it could be like Crystal and I need to get together to fix problems, and I don't know that she has my deer, and she doesn't know that I'm the hunter, but each of us are doing different things.
Mhm.
If there was some way that, and I'm not trying to throw more money at this, but if there was a way that we could have an information technology solution so that if you're a hunter on that day, you have to go to a website and register so that we know who you are, where you're gonna be. And then if you're a resident, you say, hey, I've got a deer in my yard, okay? Put something in, it's gonna bring you up a list of, these are the likely candidates who probably shot that deer.
Mhm.
There's 5 people hunting today. 4 of them are way out there. 1 of them's in Lake Chesterfield. By process of elimination, it's probably this guy.
the one thing that does bring the police into it is the only one you would really want to keep is the one that the police had to euthanize. Because a lot of these calls that I get about dead deer in people's yard, the deer have been there a while and they have been
And they're not
suddenly
expired.
found, and there's, times where sometimes they start smelling them or whatever, so it's not instantaneous every time, but it is, if the, when the police euthanize them, that's a deer a hunter's gonna wanna keep. By the time they
Right,
call
and
me.
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
I'm
by
not
the
talking
time they
about-
call me, nobody's gonna wanna keep the
Right,
deer.
yeah, no, and I'm not talking about
You know?
maintaining a list of residents that would take a deer that's dead so they can harvest. I'm talking about specific to, we're here to try to find solutions, and one of those solutions may be allowing hunting.
Mhm.
And that there is a concern that these hunters are not retrieving their deer. So that's what we're trying to fix here, not deer that have been decomposing for 5 days.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting a little bit off track here.
I think, yeah, you're hitting on a key issue in that.
It's
I
about
think
getting the two to connect to each
Yeah,
other.
And I think that notice, if you made it a requirement that they have to notify the police, that goes over very well with residents.
Mhm.
When they hear there could be more people hunting, oh, the police are being notified
Right.
of that hunter who's out there. But we don't require that right now.
For now, why don't I just kind of like take this and come up with a few scenarios.
Okay.
Like graphic illustrations, like flow charts, whatever, about these are some different ways that we connect, that could potentially connect. Yes, I'm here hunting legally with a bow. I shot the deer. I didn't find the deer. Someone else found my deer. I don't know where my deer is. And the person who found my deer doesn't know that I'm the one looking for it.
Right.
It's getting those two to meet up.
Right.
I'll put together a couple scenarios of what that might look like, flow chart, kind of diagrams, and we can look at that the next time around.
So we'll add that to the next agenda?
Yeah,
Is that what you
I think so.
Okay.
You might research how many deer on average run after
sorry?
being shot. You might research on average how many deer run after being shot with a bow, like just in general.
Just about all of them.
Yeah.
I don't know, my
I'll let you
husband
know.
shot 2 this year and they went down right away.
Well, I mean,
It
that's
wasn't-
that's more the exception than it is to the rule when you're archery hunting. I track deer 2 miles and I track deer 15 yards. It's hard to say.
I only hunt with a rifle, I can't speak for bow.
There's a bunch of different, you shoot one in the spine, it's gonna go down immediately. If you shoot one through the lungs, which is what you want to do because that's the biggest target, it could run anywhere from 20 yards to 150 yards. It all depends on that animal. There is no real
Do you think
way
there's
you can say.
a stand height that could make a difference? Because
don't
of the
think so.
angle?
Yeah, I don't really think.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're hunting
To the
from a
heart.
tree stand, you know, if you're hunting from a ground blind, you're gonna have better angle for that lung or heart shot, which is what you want. But it's safer to hunt from a tree stand as far as where that arrow is gonna go
This
too.
will probably have to be a
So
stand.
I would wanna hunt, I rarely hunt from a ground blind archery. It's almost all tree stand hunting because you need to get closer to the animal.
And your
And the higher
scent
you
is
are.
also up off the ground as well. I mean, scent
Correct.
control is pretty important.
Absolutely.
People
Sure.
overlook that all the time in terms of like how well deer can smell things. So being 15, maybe higher feet off the ground gives you a little bit of an advantage in terms of where your scent goes, but also in terms of like just your line of sight,
Yep.
being able to see things. But I'm only a rifle hunter. I can't speak to bow, so.
Yeah, that's definitely, I mean, that, you know, your scent control is number one thing, but, yeah, so that, I don't think you're gonna find that statistic.
Okay. This year his
to-
stand was higher.
So what's the other
His
thing?
stand was higher this year than it normally is, so, I don't know, but it
Well,
could
then
have been
that-
the lay of the
it-
land and
you're
everything else.
actually less likely to, it's gonna be even a harder shot. So he got, I mean, have some good shots.
Yeah, it
but-
could have been the way
Yeah.
it was on the landscape.
But the lower you get, the better access you have to the vitals, so.
Next on, we talked about hunting ordinances, MDC recommendations, we've already got that. I think for now, you know, suffice to say that, you know, all of us need a little bit more time to kind of familiarize ourselves with what Aaron's put together in that portion. And just, I looked at this earlier today when I was at work in terms of like the objectives, in terms of how we take this forward. I don't find anything wrong with this at all. I think this is outstanding. There's an education component. There's, you know, regardless of how you spell it, it almost has to be, the end game in all of this is population reduction. And it's targeted population reduction, to what Dan said, it's reducing the number of does. And that's just something that, you know, there's different ways you get there. One of is, you know, don't feed the deer. Another one is, you know, expanding the opportunities for hunting, you know, and if we have to explore other things based upon our results, I think that only factors into the discussion to say, all these plans are subject to ongoing review and change, and maybe adjust the ratio of if we have more than one method. If we get to a point where it's really out of control because people don't want to hunt, and we have to bring in, you know, like a White Buffalo, you know, LLC to kind of manage this for maybe 1 year to put a big dent in it, that may be what we have to do.
There's another option too, to try to communicate with the Department of Conservation about increasing the number of managed hunts in Rockwood, and where else do they have there ever been any in Babwood?
Yeah, there
Yes.
has.
Okay, all right. Increasing the number of managed hunts and increasing the number of hunters.
Okay.
And then getting the county to approve the ability to do it in Greensville or something. Recently, they were trying to get that approved through the county council.
Yeah, I'm not aware.
It's one of
Is it sitting with the county council, or is that what you're saying?
There was, I thought I heard there was an effort really recently to try to get something through the county council on allowing hunting in county parks.
Because
It's a very
David-
controversial issue.
Well, that would be something that Tim and I could speak to
Park.
Mark over at city council. or with
That's a
county council,
way
we
that
just
you
saw
kind
it.
of take,
So Mark
it
could
takes
do
the
that
pressure
today.
off of landowners as far as,
Right.
am I gonna give this person permission, you know, am I not? This is a managed, these are state areas, or these are county areas, or these are, you know, so that way, you know, you have them deciding on whether or not they want to do this to help wildwood, help control the population. I mean, those are the large woodlots where these deer go, you know.
Dave, if I could recommend something now, what I think might be helpful is you have some stuff on Ladue, their policies and stuff, and I know that Town and Country had something, and another municipality you mentioned is maybe have the staff put those policies into a Word document. You guys go through each numbered items or what their recommendations were based on there, and try to fit it into this, or say it's not applicable, strike it, and then that might give you more of a boilerplate to answer all of your questions that you're going. We may have the exception because of the county parks issues that, we have, Babbler and those might need to be, start from scratch.
Right.
But I think that might give you more of a basis of where do we start, how do we go here. The educational piece, Town Country already has it all.
Right.
So, instead of reinventing the wheel, maybe you guys go through to see what is applicable for here and what's not.
I
But
like
we
it.
are different,
I like it.
Yeah.
because we do have the two areas that are widely different than Ladue. I don't think Ladue has a big
We
acreage.
already did the question about it.
But yeah, so I think maybe not to put that on staff, but I know that you guys have done that for other subcommittees, that you guys just rip those things apart, put it together, and then either strike it out with a red line.
I wanted to kind of tell you, that's really what we're here to do, is support you and do those kind of things. So if you want us to take that approach, you're gonna get extra data, whatever, let us know what it is you feel like you need.
I'm totally in favor of that in terms of like mirroring what Town Country will do has already. And if you just have it in Word format, you can send it to me. I'll cobble it together.
I'll even give you one of you two my hard copies, and I got them saved.
Do they have that published on their website?
Yep, I just went to both Ladue's and Chesterfield's and
Okay.
searched deer in their search bar, and they both are extensive. Ladue's is extremely strict and extensive. They did a lot of time that went into it, definitely.
And it should go into headers and things like that, but you guys can rip it down to a Word document and then just start redlining it.
Okay.
And they're really good at it. They've done it on other committees.
Okay.
There's one other thing I'd like to bring up too, as far as funding. If you end up, if we end up recommending or want to move in the direction of hiring a company like, White Buffalo, the funding for that, there's obviously a public safety aspect to this. Would Prop P funds be available for this? And who would, I would have to think it would be
It would be
the
Steve
council.
Cross to kind of, the finance people to say what can and can't be used, but it would have to go into budget
I mean,
discussions.
we had, there's a surplus there.
Yeah, well, that's probably the area of the budget that's best funded, I think, at this point.
Right.
When we've always talked about those funds, they're fairly general in terms of their use
Mhm.
for public safety. So I think we've been trying to be very transparent when we use them and make sure the council's advised, hey, we don't take advantage of that funding and use it for this purpose. And as long as we're very clear that we're wanting to do that, I think there's a possibility you can do that.
Okay. That's something we need to explore.
Yeah, I think Steve Cross would answer that for you.
Ellisville, they use their police department to mainly manage their calling program.
Yeah.
So they do it all in-house, they don't hire anybody. So.
Hmm.
Are you volunteering?
Those-
Volunteering?
Huh?
You volunteering?
Well, I think there'd have to be some discussion with the captain and
How
our
does
chief
it-
probably.
How does it work in
The-
Ellisville?
Well, it's the same thing that White Buffalo does. So you have to, when you do a culling program, you have to do deer counts, so that's a mandatory part of any culling program.
Mhm.
So you have to have regular scheduled deer counts, and then you submit all that information to the Department of Conservation, and they review everything, and they decide how many deer they want you to cull and where. And they basically are the ones who tell you what locations you're gonna do the culling and authorize everything. So it's really in the Department of Conservation's hands as far as the decisions are made about the number of animals that are taken and the locations.
So that's,
Aaron Shank would be.
so that's gonna be a lot of like Bluebird Park area, or would that be, because that's a county park?
That's
Liberty
a-
Park is a city park,
It's a
it's
city park.
Ellisville.
Oh, okay.
So this is Ellisville City Police then? Okay, so is this something St. Louis County Police would even do?
Well, that's what I said, you'd have to speak with Captain Mundell and our chief of police.
Mhm.
And just, run the idea by them and see what their position would be on it.
Yeah, I would recommend that after you guys get further along the line, just before we
Yeah,
brought
I
it to the
think so,
captain of
because I
the
think you're
county.
talking about, and I would want to see there's, you know, their stats on that too. You know, you could probably significantly reduce costs by doing that. You know, obviously they're trained with weapons and you know, as long as, you know, it's done where they mirror White Buffalo's methods, I think you know, you're talking about a more cost-effective option there.
I do agree.
Yeah, I think that once it gets further, if it gets into your regular committee and then maybe up to council, then that's when we go talk to you.
Yeah, when it got to that point, I mean, you
Yeah,
could certainly
sounds
do a
serious.
cost comparison down the road, you know,
Yeah.
and after everybody discusses the possibilities of doing that,
Mhm.
and then, you know, go from
It would
there.
pay to reach out to them too and maybe find out particulars of how they do it and how they operate it. Maybe see if one of them would be willing to come to one of these meetings and speak on it or whatever. It would be worth looking into.
I'll get a name from you.
Okay.
Yeah, and Dave, you can have staff do that research for you. if you want.
Okay.
Just to alleviate some of your.
One editorial comment, I think, maybe I'm wrong, that if the direction the board is to go that way with having managed hunts, I suspect that would be the most controversial thing that you consider. So just be aware of that. But I also think that this document, this plan could be fluid or could be phased in. So you could consider that maybe one of the last options you look at.
Mm.
And not throw the baby out with the bathwater potentially, because I think there's a ton of good ideas that are much less controversial potentially.
Okay.
So, just my 2 cents.
No, point taken. Definitely start with the easy, in terms of like education, kind of like getting people the quick, you know, bullet point information so that they can understand the scope of the problem in terms of why what they may or may not be doing
Right,
is
yeah.
is contributing.
Simple things would go a long way, and just, yeah, there's lots that this management plan could do to address the problem without getting into that very specific issue that might be controversial.
As far as the managed hunts with the Department of Conservation too, that would be something that wouldn't be able to go into effect until the next season, because those managed hunts are already set and it's been drawn and so forth. So you have, you know, you're talking that's long, yeah, you're planning for the following year.
They're pretty well ongoing, the managed hunts are with the state-owned properties. So, I mean, like we said earlier, the county parks, there's been no hunting on their properties, but the largest county park is out on the western portion of the city.
Mhm.
And we don't have as predominant of an issue, I don't think, if you study the locations of the deer crashes. I mean, they tend to be more concentrated on Highway 109 and, you know, the eastern half of the city on Highway 100.
But what about specifically at Rockwoods Reservation, since it is right along 109 there?
They do manage hunts at.
Well, yeah, I know, but I'm saying increase the number of hunts and increase the number of hunters.
Well,
What do you think about
yeah,
that?
but what I'm saying is I think they monitor all of that. Now, I don't know what they use to determine the numbers of deer that they, you know, take.
Wow.
Yeah, but I'm just saying that they have an ongoing management program, and I'm assuming that they estimate the populations in all those areas, and they base how many deer they you know, allow to be taken each year in the hunts on what the population is. So I think they try to stay within their recommended population range. So I think they pretty well manage the populations on their properties. I think it's more the residential and, you know, private landowners that probably needs to be more of a focus.
Would you like us to try to investigate that more, or even get them here to talk to those, either Babler or Rockwoods?
Well, I know Erin Shank can speak at
She
length
can
on
speak to
anything.
Rockwoods,
I
right.
mean, she's just a wonderful source of information and a total expert in this field, and you can pretty much trust anything that she has to say is.
And if she was here, my question for her would be, and I think others might know it as well, is in terms of, because so much of this is empirical, to say, hey, we did a sample, and this is how many deer we saw. Are there guidelines about who can do that? For the sampling in terms of,
Population?
could that be a resident?
No, it's regulated by the Department of Conservation,
Okay.
so, yeah, it has to be authorized by them. So they authorized us, they
police did it
came out
last
and
year.
gave us some training
Right.
on how to do it, and so other than that, I think volunteers can do it, I think.
But that's kind of the direction I was going
Yeah.
in.
So that'd be something you'd have to speak with Aaron about, because I'm not totally 100% certain about that, but,
Well, she was very impressed with the study that these guys did,
Yeah.
and it was very, very thorough. And so I think using them is probably the best thing to do.
To the extent that, you know, that they can be freed up to do that, and
So, yeah.
doesn't take away from other
Right.
activities.
the original, I mean, it's done on an overtime basis, but just because of that, we're not gonna take a vehicle out of patrol, you know, duties to go do a deer population count. So it was done on an overtime basis, and, you know, it's a pretty involved process, but I recall that one of the reasons why we chose for the police to do it was there were some concerns if there were other individuals out there that the residents really probably wouldn't feel at ease with just random people. driving
Uniformed
through there.
officer versus.
Yeah, I mean, we were out there in
Just
marked
citizen.
police vehicles, and you're spotlighting deer, so, and we even had to have, you know, permits from the Department of Conservation to do that. So it's kind of an involved situation, so the decision was made when we decided to do that population survey for the police to do it, just because of those reasons, to avoid as many complications and issues as possible.
Those are all good points. Back to our agenda, I think we're pretty much near the end here. And I know that Erin had mentioned that she had a little bit more difficulty in making some evening meeting dates. Was there particular days of the week that were better for her? Have you had other conversations with her?
I'm not sure, I think she just needs the lead time.
Okay. And are Tuesday nights generally good for everybody at the same time? Any recurring conflicts?
At this
Depends.
time.
I mean, the first week or two of the month, there usually is a fair amount of meetings, so towards the end of the month, it's usually better, in my opinion. At least as far as Tuesday nights or Thursday nights.
Right.
Um,
So if we aimed more towards like the third Tuesday of every month, maybe? Third or fourth Tuesday of the month?
Yeah, third or fourth Tuesday, I would think would generally be better.
Okay.
And I'd kind of encourage you guys to try to pick one of those dates and see if we can stick with it.
Okay.
Because that will make it easier for us to at least manage,
Right.
because we do have to post the meeting 24 hours in advance and put an agenda out, and then Michelle will be doing meeting minutes and that kind of thing, so.
Michelle, can you look and see if either the third or fourth Tuesday in
Mhm.
July, and just kind of canvas and see if that works for everybody?
In July.
Do you want to have another one in July?
I think so.
Okay.
How?
I would be
Just that
unavailable. I'm sorry.
Yeah, what's that date?
Yeah, what is,
I'm gonna be gone one of those.
I am too.
Brendan and
I
Michelle
would be
will take the
unavailable on the
day.
16th, but available on the 23rd.
I'll
Or
be here
30th.
on the 23rd.
23rd, I will not be available.
I'll be here on the 23rd, I believe, although I might have to take my husband to the doctor that day.
Well, that leaves the
Or
30th.
30th looks fine to me thus far.
Yeah, I don't have any conflicts.
30th is fine for me as well.
Okay.
Rick?
Having trouble finding my calendar here, but,
And Sarge, how about you?
That should be fine with me.
Okay. And is 6 good, or does anyone want
Yeah, I think that'd be fine.
6:30?
6 is fine.
Okay.
Oh, what? Oh, 6 p.m., yeah.
so the 30th at 6 p.m. So that would be great.
In between now and then, I'll try and put together, you know, something that would kind of serve as like, again, like I described it, if you could put a piece of paper in front of someone who has no idea what we're trying to tell them or educate them about, and in 5 minutes, maybe even less, they would understand the problem, where we want to go, how we want to get there.
Mhm.
So it might be a page and a half, it might be 2 pages on the PowerPoint, but I think less is always more for things like this, until you get down into the weeds of like, you know, relative merit of different options for how we address the problem.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Dan, you had brought up with Erin about extending hunting seasons. Do you know if she sounded like she thought that was an interesting idea, and she didn't say that was not
Yeah, there's,
doable.
that, I have forgotten about that, thank you very much. There's a landowner that I know who is a grain farmer, and he gets special farm tags
Yeah.
to extend the season, where I was harvesting deer off of his land in March. So, I don't think this fits that category. However, if special consideration can be made because of these numbers that we have that are obviously staggering, just to find out from her if that's a viable option too, to where we can, you know, maybe if it's just, you know, the normal season ends January 15th for archery, correct? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. If we could extend that to March 15th, or if we could extend it to the end of February, I don't know. I mean, you may be, that may be an option
And it
too.
could just be the overarching principle is it could change year to year based upon the number of deer that are harvested, based upon the number of the types of methods that we're
And
using.
I think, you know, from what Aaron was saying too, even with these efforts that we are considering, we can't expect immediate results. The Town and Country only started seeing results 10, 15 years down the line with this effort. So this isn't a short-term fix. This is reduce, and then, you know, you may start. But, you know, like you said, if we sit here and we do nothing, then we're not doing our jobs. I mean, that's what, you know, right. You know, even if we can maintain and not let it grow any further, I think that's also a goal like you had brought up before, so.
All good points.
So that was on like a there are farm properties in Wildwood too.
Absolutely.
That could apply
And it was,
to that
it's
besides the parks.
specifically for crop damage. You know, that if they can prove that they've had a certain amount of crop damage because, you know, their harvest doesn't match what it should, then that's when they're given these special tags. Again, this is a different,
It's a food farm.
thing, but can they make that exception because of this? I mean, it's kind of the same thing. When you have an overpopulation problem, you need to do something to try to fix it. Overpopulation for crop damage, I mean, to me, if we're, you know, reducing in these neighborhoods the amount of vehicle collisions, that's just as important an issue as that is. Yeah, who knows?
You know, they've issued permits to Paciglias in the past.
Have they?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, there you go.
It's right next to my church.
There you go.
Go to Mass.
There you go. Right.
So, yeah, they lose their profit, you know, the plants, so
Yeah.
they let them hunt up there.
Sure.
So for the next meeting, make sure you want to try to have Aaron Shank available.
I think that if we're giving her basically a month almost of notice, we can certainly make the effort to try and get her here. And if she can't make, you know, that meeting, maybe see if we can not pin her down, but find an alternate time, or if it's just the travel coming here, maybe 6 o'clock is better if we go to where she is. And, you know, I would be willing, we don't have to bring the whole team, but
Okay, can they have this meeting offsite?
if we have to send just a couple of us to go meet with her, or I'll go do it by myself, if we just need to get her input on a couple, 2 or 3 items of critical importance, I can do that offline.
We can get her here, I'm sure we
Okay,
can figure something out.
I'll contact her about July 30th.
All right, anything else we need to get on the record for tonight?
So,
All right.
I guess that's all. Did Crystal or you're good? Okay.
If you'd like to, sir, yes.
I'd like to give a motion for adjournment.
I'll second that motion, sir.
Okay. And all in favor?
Anyone in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. We are adjourned.
Goes down.